Natsuhi yelled as she knocked loudly and repeatedly. Shortly after, there was a heavy clunking sound, and the sound at the door to Kenzo's study and locking could be heard. As the door opened, a heavily sweet venomous odor flowed out. Natsuhi was always ashamed of how she automatically grimaced at that, even though she thought it rude to the family head. Kraus was waiting for her inside the study, and Natsuhi flew into his arms. Alright, so what is this exactly? Is this before the game board? Is it during the game board? I mean, looking outside the window here, it doesn't really seem to be raining, but I mean, it's not sunny either for this to be happening before the storm.
お父様は
落ち着きたまえ。今南條先生が見ている。
But in a certain gate, Natsuhi went towards the center of the study, supported by Kraus. There, a dignified bed fitting for the head of the Ushiromiya family could be seen, along with Nanjo, Genji, and Kumasawa. Okay, well, I see Genji. He is alive here, so I guess this is before the killings even began.
Nanjo sensei. お父様は
After sighing deeply, Nanjo left the side of the bed. On the bed, Kenzo could be seen lying down, sleeping.
大往生だ。金蔵さんも心残りはなかっただろう。
Oh no, Kenzo dies before the game properly begins. What a twisty. Oh hey, there's still some of that green stuff Kenzo has, like, lying around. Don't mind if I do.
お父様
There's some good shit here. Sobbing, Natsuhi put her head against the chest of the man who had fallen into a sleep from which he would never awaken.
奥様どうかしっかりお父様こんな突然なんて
Natsuhi couldn't stop her tears over the death of Kenzo, whom she had loved like a second father. Kumasawa rubbed Natsuhi's back, consoling her. Kraus slumped into his late father's favorite chair. By sitting there, he might have been immersing himself in the memories of his departed father. Or perhaps he thought that by sitting there, he might be able to understand just a bit of the madness of Kenzo's later years, which had eluded him to the end of his father's life. So, is this how I'm supposed to view this? That Natsuhi's unreliable narration from the first game when she talked to Kenzo, like in the study room, was a result of her love for him as a father-daughter type relationship? Nanjo turned his back and looked down over the outside world through a crack in the curtains. It was the same thing he'd often done when Kenzo sat in that chair, contemplating a chess move. Like, I'm wondering if this is a father-daughter relationship or there is something more to it. That Natsuhi saw Kenzo as a true father to her, whereas before, either she never had a father, or he had a or she had a terrible father. So she saw Kenzo as a better father, which is, you know, at face value, that's kind of hard to digest. But then again, he's like, her entire behavior in regards to Kenzo, even before, was really weird, like at all times. She respected Kenzo more than anybody else in this island, which is definitely questionable. Like, it makes me think that either this is a father type thing, or like Natsuhi had feelings for Kenzo, whatever those reasons may be. However hard that may be to imagine, to love someone like Kenzo.
同じ死ぬならせめて寝込んで1年後に死亡とか。もう少ししかるべき準備の猶予期間を設けてから死んで欲しかったのね。それは逆だ。最後の瞬間までお元気だったことを喜ぶべきです。建前上はそうなるがね。
Nanjo understood that as well. This was the death of Ushiromiya Kenzo, a man who had risen like a comet and glittered like a supernova in the post-war world of business. His funeral would probably be of a fantastic scale, and would also be the ceremony marking Kraus's inheritance of the headship. Well, on first thought, I would say that, wait, who is gonna come to his ceremony anyway? Because I'm pretty sure that Kenzo had a lot of enemies. But, you know, it's the opposite way around. It's because he had so many enemies that a lot of people would come to his funeral. Not just for the sake of Kenzo, of course, but for the sake of inheritance and stealing the inheritance and such. That would be one thing. He would have to arrange everything as the host of the event, carrying out funeral diplomacy perfectly, and make it clear that the Uchirimiya family would still hold enormous influence in the political and financial spheres. As Nanjo watched Kraus, he was vividly reminded of the time when Kenzo had been suddenly selected as the Uchirimiya family head. A time in which Kenzo had been lost and confused. Nanjo could remember that well, and for that reason he was able to understand Kraus's distress and sympathize with it. Natsuhi's sobs eventually subsided. Seeing this, and leaving Kumasawa to care for Natsuhi as a fellow woman, Genji returned to Kraus. And he lowered his head slightly, as though asking what should be done.
手続き等は私と源氏さんでやろう。クラウスさんはまずは親戚の方々に連絡した方がいいでしょうな。
Kraus, with his hands still over his eyes, didn't respond. Perhaps even though he had known this day would come, Kraus really couldn't hide his shock at how suddenly it had reached him.
私と南條先生にお任せを。旦那様はまずは奥様とご相談いただくのが良いかと思います。
Maybe she heard that, or maybe it was a coincidence. As though responding to Genji's words, Natsuhi came over. Her eyes were red from crying so much, but she apparently understood the heavy responsibility that had been imposed on the two of them even better than Kraus did.
これからはあなたが栄光ある後宮家の当主です。お父様の後を立派に継いだことを内外に示しましょう。この夏日、あなたの妻として棺を並べる日までお仕えする覚悟です。
Trying to encourage her husband who has overcome with shock, Natsuhi lent him some reassuring words. When Kraus finally lowered the hands that had been covering his face, he looked up at the ceiling with a blank expression and let out a deep, deep sigh.
どうかしっかり。お父様の残したものを食い荒らそうと目論む輩が大勢いるのですよ。
understatement of the freaking year.
私たちはお父様の名誉と財産を守るために戦わなければなりません。それが後宮家当主の最初の仕事ですよ。
分かってる。分かっているとも。
南條先生と源氏はお役所や葬儀業者への手配をお願いします。特に源氏、お父様の葬儀にふさわしいものとなるよう特に手配を頼みますよ。
かしこまりました。
Consider it done. I mean, we're gonna have to decide, however, on where you want us to bury him. Or would you prefer if his body was cremated? I mean, Kinzo did seem the type of person who would want that for his death.
それから南條先生、お父様は病院でお亡くなりになったわけではないので、
場合によっては解剖が入るかもしれませんな。
なんとかなりませんか。亡くなったとはいえお父様の大切なお体です。傷をつけるなど耐えられることではありません。
気持ちはわかる。だがそういうところをきっちりすることも大切だ。それにこう言ってはなんだが、難しい親族の方々が多いんじゃないかね。
There was no way to know what those inheritance vultures might try to find fault with. They might squawk that there was something suspicious about the cause of death, and use that as a point of contention to start some trouble. I mean, if we're talking about some people hiding the fact that he even died in the first place, I can understand the relatives going that route. But as long as the relatives will be contacted about this, I think it should be fine. Right now, not only was it important to pay Kinzo's remains the respect they were due, but there was also a need to focus on solidifying the position of the new family head, Kraus.
わかりました。必要最小限にお願いします。間違ってもお父様の威厳が損なわれるようなお姿にしないように。
それは大丈夫だ。安心しなさい。とにかく金蔵さんのことはわしらに任せて、夏日さんはクラウスさんのそばにいてあげなさい。これからが大変なんだから。
分かっています。あなたもどうかしっかり。
Kraus was still staring lazily at the ceiling with a befuddled expression on his face. Natsuhi understood the shock and heavy responsibility. She felt that she understood her husband's feelings as well as anyone possibly could.
親族への連絡は私がします。今だけは休まれてください。
Kraus didn't respond. Natsuhi thought that he was being a little bit weak, but that just made it all the more important for her to support him right now. Seeing her husband like this actually stirred Natsuhi up, and a resolute expression rose to her face.
これから忙しくなります。今できることを始めましょう。夫はきっとお父様と二人きりで話したいこともあると思います。私たちは一度ここを退出しましょう。
そうでございますね。その時間はきっと今しか取れないでしょうから。
Being in charge of a funeral is tiring work. There's no time to shed tears. If Kraus were ever to be given time to cry for his dead father, that time would have to be now. Everyone agreed with Kumasawa's words. Even then, Kraus continued to lazily gaze up at the ceiling and didn't respond in any way. Natsuhi urged the servants to go.
私はジェシカにも話してきます。今やあの子が次期当主です。それにふさわしい自覚を持つようによく言い聞かせなくては。
待て。
As they each started to make their way out of the study, Kraus finally spoke. They stop walking.
はい、
待て。
はい。
And she already stopped walking, just like her husband had asked. But despite that, he had once again told her to wait. From those slightly weak words, Natsuki understood that he had probably stopped her because he wanted her to be by his side.
お前たちは下へ。私は夫と言います。何かあったらここに電話するように。
かしこまりました。だから待てと言っている。
Oh, big size font? Yeah, I mean, just hold on a second. Like, we haven't established yet that we should keep all of this a secret from everyone else, and thus create more family drama. I mean, what would Umineko be without family drama anyway? When Karl suddenly raised his voice, everyone jumped and turned around. Unable to comprehend what she had done to spark her husband's wrath, Natsuki ran up to him.
どうしましたあなた。私は何か失礼なことを口にしてしまいましたか。だったらお許しを。
いや、違う。そうじゃない。そうじゃない。少し待て。時間をくれ。
ええ、分かっています。心を整理するためにも必要です。私たちはその時間をあなたにあげようと、ここから静かに出ていくだけですよ。
だからそれを待てというのだ。いいか、誰もその場から動くな。一歩たりともだ。疲れたなら椅子にでもソファーにでも好きに座ればいい。だから何も喋らずに静かに黙って何もせずにいろ。
Those unreasonable words felt like a glimpse of how Kinzo used to be. Natsuki couldn't hide a slight surprise at those words, which made it seem as though Kinzo had possessed her husband. Yeah, I mean, her husband having the combined personality of Kinzo, who she saw herself as her father or something more, or someone who she also loved. I mean, this is probably turning Natsuki on right now. Natsuki told the servants to wait for the time being. She ordered them to sit in a sofa a shorter distance off, approached her husband, and spoke to me in a small voice.
あなたがお命じになれば、夏日はいくらでも待ちます。とどまります。ですからどうか、お気を鎮められてください。
違う。そうではないのだ。そうではないのだ。
Was it really his father's blood? Or was he actually being possessed? Kara's disorderly style of speech strongly resembled Kinzo's. As she watched this, Natsuki felt with even greater certainty that Kraus was indeed Kinzo's son, and that he was the true successor to the head, more suitable than any other person.
夏日、こっち。
Kraus stood up and headed towards the window, trying to lengthen the distance between himself and the servants waiting on the sofa by even a small amount. Natsuki realized that he must have something secret that he wanted to talk about.
はい、あなた。何事ですか。
親父に死なれてはまずいのだ。
しかし、もうお亡くなりになりました。そういうわけには参りません。
そうじゃない。今はまずいんだ。
どういうことですか。
親父の財産を担保にしている。
No way! Oh, oops. I was supposed to sit near the other servants. I wasn't supposed to hear this. My bad.
相続問題になれば隠し通せない。
はあ。担保ですか。いかほど。
メロディーランドの時、近藤君を応援したことがあっただろう。
Melody Land?
あの方とは縁を切れと申し上げたじゃありませんか。私には断ったと言ったはず。どうして。
男の義理というものがある。 断れなかった。
Kraus claimed to hold honor as a virtue. However, Natsuhi knew that he most often used this as an excuse after he couldn't bring himself to pass up a deal.
お金に余裕があるならいざ知れず。この島のリゾート計画でかなりの借金をされたのではありませんでしたか？
ああ、したさ。方々で恩人に世話になったのだ。それらを返済するためにも座しているわけにはいかない。返済するためには金がいる。金を生むためには金がいる。金がなければ始まらない。この島の計画だって企画会社がおかしなことにならなければ順調だったのだ。都の役人とも連携は取れていた。東京都の新しい観光スポットになると知事の太鼓判ももらえていた。私の根回しは完璧だったのだ。たまたま巡り合わせとタイミングが悪かった。ちょっとした運のすれ違い、事故みたいなものだった。
あれは事故なんかではありません。
Yeah, I mean, if someone were to deny it in red, they would say that there was no accident.
詐欺です。あなたは騙されたのです。初めから彼らはこの島のリゾート計画など描けていなかったのです。
そんなことはないぞ。土方君のビジョンは先見性にあふれていた。世界と未来に目を向けた広大な視野は私が夢だと信じていたものなど猫の額ほどの広さしかないことを教えてくれた。夢が広がる世界に未来に。夏日も一緒に聞いていただろう。
ええ、聞いていました。そしてお帰りになられた後に申し上げたはずです。あの方はうさんくさい。語るのは未来ばかりで地に足がついていない。これ以上お付き合いしてはならないと。
土方君は立派な好青年だ。彼の生き様からは学ぶことも多いぞ。
Oh yeah, well, if you like him so much, why don't you just marry him already?
彼は若いが尊敬できる。彼のことを侮辱することは許さんぞ。
あなたは同じことを月旅行の時にもおっしゃいました。
Wait, what? The moon tourism? The fuck is that?
先見性がある、未来がある、夢があると連呼され、その挙句はいかがでしたか？荒唐無稽な話だったとあなた自らがお認めになったではありませんか。私はNASA の高官とか名乗るおかしな男が現れた頃からこれは絶対におかしいと確信しておりました。
Are you kidding me? You actually had that in plan. Like, what were you gonna do? Create like a gigantic pirate ship that flies all the way to the moon for people to travel? Move over, One Piece fans. Kraus over here watched One Piece quite a few times for him to be thrilled by the idea.
あれはあの外国人が国際的な詐欺師だったに過ぎない。あの件については私も曽根崎氏も被害者だ。彼の先見性は今をもって間違っていない。将来必ず世界の大富豪が宇宙旅行をたしなむ時代が訪れる。そしてその最初の事業は民間E社によって独占されるだろう。着眼点は間違っていない。それを利用して世界中の投資家を騙している国際的な詐欺集団がいて。
Okay, slow down there, Kraus. You are so passionate about the idea, the text box cannot even handle it.
曽根崎という男もその一味だったと申し上げているのです。あなたはどこまでお人よしなのですか？どうしていつもうさんくさい話を疑いもせずに乗ってしまうのですか？
訂正しろ。曽根崎氏は優秀な未来ある男だ。うさんくさくなどない。彼の語る夢は未来を先取りしているからこそ、それが見えるものには妄想にしか見えんだけだ。女のお前には未来など見えん。
ええ、女の私には未来など見えません。でも現在なら見えます。私の目の前で狡猾な二枚舌の詐欺師たちに丸め込まれ騙されてなお妄信している哀れな夫の姿なら見ることができます。
ねえ、黙れ。お前には金も事業も経済も何もわからん。夫の仕事に口は出すな。妻は家事だけをしてればいい。
Oh, that old story.
お前は黙っていろ。
Natsuki fell silent, just as Kraus wanted. She was already far beyond anger and sadness, and the emotion that lay on the other side of those was an almost indifferent pity. Kraus had always been frightened of Kinzo since the days of his youth, and had come to subconsciously admire the way his father moved. Without realizing it, he had come to believe that he could only be recognized as a man in his own right if he surpassed his father. However, Kinzo had been a mad genius, the likes of which had never before been seen in the Ushimiya family's long history. Which had never before been... Okay, I guess that's a normal sentence there. It's... for a second I thought it was weird, but nah, it's good. His talent was a gift from heaven. And it definitely wasn't genetic, much less something that could be learned. Natsuki instructed the servants not to tell anyone about Kenzo's death, and dismissed everyone for the time being, to give the two of them a chance to talk alone. Then, she invited Kraus to her bedroom, and made him tell her everything about their current financial situation. They were things that Natsuki hadn't been told about under the assumption that a woman had no business knowing. Natsuki had herself made a point of avoiding this area in the past, thinking that it wasn't a wise place to intrude on such matters. However, this might also have meant that she had been remiss in her duty as a wife to protect her family. The depths of this sin had been made quite clear to Natsuki. Kraus was probably tired of trying to defend himself. Perhaps because he had gotten a headache, he hid his face and sank into silence. Natsuki noticed that the water in the electric kettle was boiling and stood up to refill her cup with black tea. And when she touched the cup of black tea, she noticed for the first time that something in the cup and saucer clinging together told her that her fingers were shaking. Kraus had built up a large debt to obtain funds for his various projects, and to cover the losses when they failed. Of course, he had put the mansion and property up as collateral. However, doing such a thing above board would have resulted in the mortgage being registered. In other words, there would have been a record that Kraus had put Kinzo's wealth up as collateral to obtain a loan without anyone's permission. Kraus couldn't afford for Kinzo, Eva, and the others to learn of such a thing. And therefore, he had been putting those assets up as collateral using the worst possible method. What Kraus was probably meant that he had... What Kraus was saying probably meant that he had, in essence, signed away the rights to their assets. If those assets had been used as collateral for a loan, then Kraus would have had some options under the law. He would have had to deal with a bank, which would have absolutely no compassion. But they would have been able to work something out within the rules set by society. However, signing away the deed and power of attorney was a whole different story. In short, even the mansion they were living in was at risk. If the person holding the deed were to decide to ignore his agreement with Kraus and sell the mansion to a third party right this moment, they would have no recourse whatsoever. Far from using their house as collateral for a loan, this was basically the same as selling it to borrow money. I mean, again, if it were Natsuki, she would tell you that you are being gullible / naive once again.
経済人同士の信用取引だ。私も相手を信用している。相手だって私に金を貸すことで私が大きな事業を成功させ、投資した額が大きくなって帰ってくることを信用している。委任状を預けたのは私の誠意と事業の絶対の成功を疑わないからだ。ここで渋ったらどうなる？自分の事業に自分で自信が持てないことになるだろう。
If your ventures had been successful, we wouldn't be in debt now, would we? Natsuo barely stopped herself from saying it.
お父様は亡くなりました。するとどうなりますか？あなたの借金が白日のもととなり、他の兄弟たちに咎められることになるわけですか？
それだけでは済まない。多分刑事訴訟にも及ぶだろう。
刑事訴訟？どうしてですか？
君は知らない方がいい。とにかく絶対にこのことを誰にも知られてはならんのだ。
Kraus looked at the floor shamefully, shaking his head over and over. If it would come to criminal charges, then he must have broken some laws. He had probably been so intent on raising a large sum of money that he hadn't paid any heed to appearances. Kraus had seriously believed that his many projects would definitely succeed and return huge profits. So he had figured that even if he broke a few laws, he would be able to pay everything back before too long and pretend that the whole thing had never happened. This might have lessened his resistance towards breaking a couple laws. And now Kenzo's death, the worst possible thing, had occurred. And soon he wouldn't be able to compete. And soon he wouldn't be able to keep it all hidden.
私たちはどうなるのですか？
心配することはない。君は信じてくれんな。景気は今確実に上向いているんだ。私が都心で投資した不動産価値はみるみる上昇している。今それらを統合して巨大ビジネスタワーを建設する計画が進んでいる。これは私のこれまでの投資の中で最も確実で最も大きな成功をしているものだ。ただそれは身をつけるのにまだ時間をかける。絶対に確実だが今すぐというわけではないのだ。
その事業の成功は借金を返済するに足りるものですか？
もちろんだと思う。これまでの借金を全て帳消しにできる。だから信じてくれ。もう少しだけ時間が欲しいんだ。
しかしお父様はもうお亡くなりになってしまいました。もうその時間はないのですよ。
I guess this is where the idea of hiding Kinzo's death from everyone else comes in.
分かっている。分かっているとも。だからどこかから金を調達して今すぐに借金を返さなくてはならない。とにかく金が必要なんだ。金が大量に今すぐ。
To summarize, he needed a lot of money right now. Umineko Naku Koro ni. Kraus roared and clutched his hands, writhing about as if in pain. As Natsuo watched, several conflicting emotions swirled about in her chest. She felt pity for her husband, but at the same time she felt he was a fool. And she also felt a mixture of anger and regret towards her own irresponsibility in letting her husband run wild for so long. It should have been clear to him well before today that they were in a very critical situation. And yet, he had irresponsibly waited for this moment to come and was now writing about it. Her husband was so foolish and pitiful. It was easy to feel frustrated with him. Hiram, she was his wife. For a wife to ridicule her husband as a fool would run in conflict with her responsibilities. I mean, if he was a fool, then she would have to support him to compensate. However, she didn't have a clue what she was meant to do about this. If there was a massive amount of money like that within easy reach, there was no way that Kraus wouldn't have already laid his hands on it. It would also be easy to tell him to be a man and give up on everything. But that would also run in conflict with her responsibilities. She was Ushiro Miyanazi, the woman who had become Kraus's wife and sworn to support him, the new head of the Ushiromiya family for as long as she lived. She had to somehow help her husband in his efforts to raise money. She understood it logically, but she couldn't suppress the indescribable feeling of dejection that seemed to rise up from the dark depths of her heart.
そうだ。親父の隠し黄金。10トンの黄金なら200億の価値がある。あれさえあれば。そうそう。あれさえ見つかれば万事は解決する。夏日、あれだ。魔女の碑文だ。あれを解こう。一緒に解こう。黄金さえ見つかれば万事解決なんだ。そうさ。この島のどこかに隠されてるはずなんだ。あれさえあれば、あれさえあれば。
一体あなた、やめてください。
Kraus, acting as excited as if he'd thought of a perfect, brilliant plan, grasped Natsu's upper arm tightly. Natsu couldn't help but be dumbfounded. It wasn't just because she had heard something as fake-sounding as the hidden gold brought up. Kraus usually disparaged the story of the hidden gold, saying that it didn't exist and that it was all fiction his father had created to borrow a lot of money. Right now, Natsu was doubly taken aback because of this.
そうだ、ジェシカにも協力してもらおう。子供の感性でなら解けることもあるかもしれない。今は一家の一大事なんだ。みんなで協力し合わなくてはならない。そうだ、あんなの親父が作った気まぐれな謎なんだ。解けるはずさ、解けないはずがないんだ。それしかないんだ。ああ、夏日、本当によかった。まだ手は残っていたんだよ。こんなに身近に。この島に黄金はある。それさえあれば万事解決なんだ。夏日、ジェシカを呼ぶんだ。今すぐここに。家族の危機は家族で乗り越えよう。さあ早く。黄金はこの島にある。すぐ身近にあるんだ。
Natsu knocked Kraus aside, unable to withstand the pain in the arm he was twisting in his excitement. Yeah, now it is Natsu's turn to crush Kraus's fingers and use a wrestling move on him. Kraus tripped over the edge of the bed and flopped pathetically onto the floor. Oh. Okay, maybe we're exaggerating over here, Natsu. Don't kill him.
いい加減にしてください。そしてどうか冷静になられてください。後宮家の一大事にそんな夢みたいなことを言い出してどうするというのですか。
夏日、
あなたもよく頭を冷やされて現実的な金策をお考えになってください。私も頭を冷やしてきます。
待ってくれ、夏日。
Maybe falling over had knocked the sense back into him. Kraus tried to tell Natsu to stop, but she just kept walking. Closing the door forcefully, Natsu dashed away. Natsu ran through the corridor. And she didn't want anyone to see her like this, but she ran headlong at Genji.
大変失礼いたしました。奥様、お怪我はございませんか？
私は大丈夫です。放っておきなさい。
かしこまりました。
源氏、お父様の書斎はどうなっていますか？
そのままにしております。南條先生は客間におられますが。
そうですか。書斎の鍵は持っていますか？
はい、ございます。
お貸しなさい。しばらく私とお父様の二人きりにするように。もし主人に私のことを聞かれても知らないというのですよ。
かしこまりました。
After grabbing the key to the study that Genji was holding out to her, Natsuki rushed up the stairs. She then flew into the study. And finally, she cried out loud.
O 父様、愚かな私たちをどうかお許しください。私と主人はお父様の築き上げてきたものを受け継ぐことができます。罪深く愚かな私たちをどうかお許しください。そしてもしお許しいただけるならば、どうか愚かな私たちをお導きください。
Clinging to Kenzo as he slept in the bed, Natsuki cried even harder. She kept imagining Kenzo sitting up suddenly and petting her hand.